The relay clicked. The sound, a minute metallic snap, was fundamentally wrong. Yakov Levinson's entire consciousness, honed by years of obsessive work in shielded laboratories, narrowed to that single auditory event. It was 2.4 milliseconds slower than the PTR-278 telecommunications distribution frame's standard switching relay. A deviation of 0.8 milliseconds was within tolerance. 1.2 was an anomaly worth noting. 2.4 was a catastrophic failure signature. In the profound, tomb-like quiet of the concrete basement, beneath the pervasive 50 Hz hum of the building's primary transformer, the sound was not a gunshot in a library. It was the premature detonation of a bomb fuse. Yakov froze. His fingers, which colleagues described not as belonging to a signals intelligence officer, but to a concert pianist or a neurosurgeon, hovered a mere 3 millimeters above the exposed copper bismuth wiring of terminal block 7 gamma. On his custom-molded earpiece, a whisper, digitized and stripped of all inflection, became a sterile query. Ari Ben David's voice. Yakov, status report. Clock is at 11 minutes, 30 seconds. Yakov did not respond. His breath was a captive in his lungs. He was listening, not to his team leader, but to the building itself, treating the entire structure as an acoustic chamber. To the groans of the water pipes, the hum of the transformer, and now, a new sound. A scraping noise transmitted through the floor joists directly above his head. Wood on wood. A chair, heavy, likely oak, being pushed back from a table with deliberate force. It was 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday, February 19, 1998. Apartment 3B. The sole resident was Frau Hilde Keller, age 74. Widow of a Swiss Army colonel. Her file, a 97-page document compiled from 3 weeks of relentless, multi-spectrum surveillance, was a testament to predictability. It stated, with the certainty of an astronomical chart, that she retired to bed no later than 10:15 p.m., following the conclusion of the evening news on Schweizer Fernsehen. Her routine was a metronome, a fixed point in the operational chaos around which they had built their entire insertion plan. Tonight, the metronome was shattered. Another sound followed, more subtle. The faint shuffling of slippered feet on a parquet floor. Footsteps. Yakov's heart, a normally placid organ, began a frantic, percussive rhythm against his ribs. He forced himself to take a controlled breath, a technique learned in a Negev desert training facility designed to simulate extreme stress. He glanced at the device cradled in the palm of his left hand, the Series 7 Vampire Tap. It was not merely a piece of hardware. It was his life's work, the culmination of 2 years of research at the blandly named Ramat Gan Advanced Technology Institute, a Mossad front. It was a marvel of miniaturization, weighing only 48 grams. Its core innovation was a passive resonance circuit that drew picoamperes of power from ambient radio frequency waves. From broadcast radio, television signals, even the building's own electrical wiring. This harvested energy powered its listening and storage functions. Only during its 1.5-second burst transmission would it draw a minuscule 0.001 milliamps from the phone line itself. An electrical footprint so faint, it was designed to be indistinguishable from background line noise to even the most sophisticated time-domain reflectometry sweeps. But it was not attached. The induction clamps were open. The connection was not made. The mission was incomplete. The footsteps above were moving now, their direction unmistakable. Not towards the bedroom or the bathroom, but towards the apartment's main hallway, which led to the front door. "Ari," Yakov whispered, his own voice a dry rasp, the sound alien to him. Activity. Apartment 3B. Unscheduled and anomalous. A 3-second pause on the line. Ari, from his observation post in a rented third-floor flat across Liebefeldstrasse, would be processing this new variable. His mind, a cold, brutally efficient calculator of risk, would be rerunning the mission's probability of success models. The window for this operation, calculated based on the average time between police patrols and the building's periods of deepest quiet, was exactly 18 minutes. They were now 11 minutes and 48 seconds in. Describe the activity. Be specific, Ari's voice commanded, still flat, betraying nothing. Panic was a luxury reserved for the unprepared, and Ari Ben David was never unprepared. Footsteps, deliberate, moving toward the hallway. I assess a high probability she is intending to exit her apartment. Yakov's eyes darted to the basement door, a simple wooden frame with a standard Kaba 8 tumbler lock he had bypassed with a custom machine tension wrench and a half-diamond pick in under 30 seconds. It offered no real protection against entry, but now it represented a formidable barrier to his exit. He began the abort sequence without waiting for the order. A series of precise, memorized movements. Retract the fiber optic inspection scope from the conduit. Gather the microprobes of the multimeter. Wipe the faint residue of graphite lubricant from the lock housing with a specialized solvent cloth. Each movement had been practiced to the point of autonomic reflex in a full-scale mock-up of this very basement, constructed from blueprints obtained by an asset within the Bern Municipal Planning Office. But the Negev was silent. The Negev didn't have Frau Keller's footsteps approaching. A new sound, sharper and far more terrifying, cut through the basement's gloom. The unmistakable, resonant clink of a heavy deadbolt being turned in the main building entrance hall, just beyond his basement door. Someone was coming into the building, or worse, someone was standing in the hall, looking out. On the encrypted comms channel, Leah Rimon's voice, the driver and street-level lookout, sliced in, sharp with controlled urgency. Vehicle, blue and white livery, Bern Cantonal Polizei patrol car. No lights. Rolling to a stop, 50 meters down the block, south side. Police. Not a routine patrol. A routine patrol would have its lights on. This was a response. Ari's decision came in a clipped syllable, the sound of a circuit breaker tripping. Abort. Abort now. All stations. Silent exit. Rendezvous 2. There was no silent exit. The brass handle on the basement door began to turn, its unoiled spindle groaning in the silence. Yakov had less than 3 seconds to process a decision tree with no favorable outcomes. Option 1. Discard the equipment, attempt to bluff his way out as a telecom technician responding to a line fault. Plausibility, low. He had no work order, no uniform. Option 2. Conceal himself in the deepest shadows and pray to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. Plausibility of success. Marginal, but non-zero. He chose the darkness. With the fluidity of a cat, he melted behind a row of rusted, asbestos-lagged heating pipes. The vampire tap clutched in his hand. The device, a piece of technology worth more than a squadron of fighter jets, was now as damning as a signed confession. The door creaked open. A powerful beam of light, far brighter than a standard pocket torch, cut through the gloom. It wasn't a policeman. It was Frau Keller, holding a large black maglite, the kind favored by security guards. Her face, etched with the lines of age, was a mask of determined, unshakable suspicion. The story of this catastrophic failure did not begin in a damp Bern basement. It began 6 months earlier, with a single, 4.7-second burst of garbled data intercepted by the sprawling antenna farm of Unit 8200. Israel's Signal Intelligence Corps, deep in the Negev desert. The transmission was short, cloaked in a fiendishly complex layer of AES-256 encryption, and bounced through a dozen compromised servers and open relays from Tehran to Caracas before its terminal point on a server farm in Frankfurt, Germany. For 3 weeks, it was just digital noise, one of millions of such signals in the global data storm. It was flagged for analysis only because its point of origin was a server known to be used by Hezbollah's external security organization. Then, a breakthrough. A young analyst, a corporal named Eitan, a prodigy in number theory who had been fast-tracked out of his university mathematics program, found a flaw. It wasn't in the encryption algorithm itself, which was mathematically perfect, but in the key exchange protocol used to generate the session keys. A tiny, almost imperceptible statistical bias in the pseudo-random number generator. He developed an algorithm to exploit this bias, running it on the unit's supercomputer cluster for 72 straight hours. The message decrypted. It was a single sentence. The Swiss vessel is prepared for the architect's cargo. This sentence, seemingly innocuous, triggered high-level alarms across every branch of Israeli intelligence. The architect was a known, high-threat codename. It belonged to Imad Mugnieh, Hezbollah's shadowy chief of external operations. A man responsible for the 1983 bombings of the U.S. Embassy and Marine Barracks in Beirut, the hijacking of TWA Flight 847, and the bombing of the Israeli Embassy in Buenos Aires. A ghost who had eluded capture for 2 decades. But Swiss vessel and cargo were new, unknown variables, and their vagueness was terrifying. A second intercept, 2 weeks later, after Eitan had refined his decryption technique, was more specific. It mentioned a name: Abdallah El-Zain, a Lebanese national, 52 years old, officially listed as a self-employed importer of fine carpets, living a quiet, unassuming life in a modest apartment at 27 Liebefeldstrasse, Bern, Switzerland. The mission, codenamed Operation Helvetia, was immediately assigned to the Caesarea department of the Mossad, the unit responsible for special operations in hostile territory. The team was handpicked by the Mossad's director, Danny Yatom, in a closed-door meeting. The team leader was Ari Ben David, 48 years old, a veteran of a dozen high-risk operations across the Middle East and Europe. His legend within the agency was forged not in success, but in the masterful handling of a near disaster: the 1992 extraction of a defecting Iranian nuclear scientist from Isfahan. The mission had gone sideways from the start. Their local contact was a double agent for Iran's Ministry of Intelligence. The primary extraction route was compromised. Ari, cut off from support, had navigated his 2-man team and the asset on foot for 3 days and nights through the Zagros Mountains, evading Revolutionary Guard patrols and Basij militia search parties. They survived on a single shared canteen of water and foraged roots. His defining skill was not bravery, which he considered a reckless emotion, but a chillingly accurate ability to calculate and manipulate risk in real time. He saw the world as a cascading series of probabilities, and his job was to force them to bend in Israel's favor. The mission's technician was Yaakov Levinson, 34, a prodigy who had been headhunted from the IDF's C4I Corps, command, control, communications, computers, and intelligence. He was not a field agent in the traditional sense. He was a pure scientist, more comfortable with a soldering iron than a firearm. He had single-handedly designed the Series 7 Vampire Tap after its predecessor, the Series 6, had been discovered by a Russian FSB technical surveillance countermeasures team in Vienna. The Russians had detected the minute power drain of the older device. Yakov became obsessed, spending a year in a windowless lab, developing a device that used its passive resonance circuit, sipping energy from ambient radio waves to power its primary functions. It only drew from the target phone line during its microsecond burst transmissions, a signature so small it was below the noise floor of the best detection equipment in the world. Its delicate calibration, which had to be adjusted on-site to the specific capacitance and resistance of the target line, required his specific touch. No one else was qualified. The third member was Leah Ryman, 29, the driver and street-level lookout. Born in Montreal to Israeli parents, she had been recruited out of McGill University, where she was studying architecture. She possessed a rare form of eidetic memory specific to urban geography. Dropped in any city, she could memorize the entire street grid, including one-way streets, traffic light patterns, and potential escape routes, in 72 hours. Her defining moment came during an operation in East Berlin in 1989, just months before the wall fell. Her vehicle, a modified Opel sedan containing 2 Caesarea agents and a high-level Stasi defector, was cornered in a blind alley by 2 Trabants of the secret police. While the agents in the back prepared for a firefight they could not win, Leah reversed at over 80 kilometers per hour, performed a perfect 180-degree J-turn in a space barely wider than the car itself, and escaped by driving through a pedestrian walkway the Stasi had deemed impassable for any vehicle. She was, without debate, the best urban driver in the Mossad. The final 2 members of the team were the support and security element, Ronan and David. Both were decorated veterans of the Kidon unit, the Mossad's elite assassination squad. For this mission, however, their role was strictly contingency. They were the muscle, the firearms experts, the specialists in what the agency's internal lexicon called aggressive problem-solving. They would secure the perimeter, create diversions if needed, and, in a worst-case scenario, provide covering fire for the team's extraction. Their very presence on the mission roster was a clear indicator of its perceived risk level. The geopolitical chessboard was dangerously crowded. Iran, through its proxy Hezbollah, was aggressively expanding its operational network in Europe. The goal was twofold: to establish logistical routes for moving operatives and materials, and to create fundraising channels through seemingly legitimate businesses. Switzerland, with its long history of neutrality, its formidable banking secrecy laws, and its Central European location, was the perfect operational environment. Abdallah El-Zain was not just a carpet importer. Mossad surveillance, which included cross-referencing shipping manifests from the port of Beirut with his flight records and a deep analysis of his financial transfers, painted a far more sinister picture. His carpets arrived from Damascus, but their bills of lading showed they were often rerouted through the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, a Hezbollah stronghold. The money from their sale was wired through a labyrinthine series of shell corporations in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands before ending up in accounts linked to known Hezbollah front organizations. The intelligence suggested El-Zain was a Moxin, a quartermaster for Hezbollah's European operations. He wasn't just moving money. He was acquiring components. The fragmented intercepts spoke of industrial-grade chemical precursors, radiological isotopes used in medical imaging equipment that could be weaponized, and sophisticated detonation circuitry sourced from German electronics firms. The pieces of a radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb, The genesis of Operation Helvetia came when a high-level Mossad source inside Iran's Ministry of Intelligence, codenamed Apollo, reported that Mughnieh's Architect project was entering its final phase. A meeting was scheduled in Bern. El-Zain was to receive his final instructions for assembly and deployment of the device. The intelligence from Apollo was specific and crucial. The instructions would not be delivered via email, dead drop, or courier. They would come via a secure landline phone call from a handler in Beirut. The call would use a one-time verbal code system. Intercepting that single phone call became the mission's absolute focal point. It was the only way to know the target city, the timing, and the method of the planned attack. But bugging El-Zain's apartment directly was deemed impossible. A 1996 attempt by Germany's BND to place a listening device in the Hamburg apartment of a suspected al-Qaeda financier had been detected. The fallout from that discovery had been a massive upgrade in counter-surveillance techniques among terrorist groups. Operatives were now routinely trained to sweep their own living spaces with commercially available and increasingly sophisticated bug detectors. El-Zain's third-floor apartment was a digital fortress. The only technically vulnerable point was the building's main telecommunications infrastructure, specifically the PT-78 distribution frame in the basement. From there, a tap could be placed on the physical copper line running to his apartment, a connection that was upstream of any internal sweeps he might conduct. The plan was set. The team entered Switzerland separately over a period of 4 days, on expertly forged passports. Ari as a Canadian software executive attending a conference in Zurich. Yakov as a Belgian art historian researching Paul Klee in Bern. Leah as a French fashion student visiting friends in Geneva. They established a base of operations in a rented apartment 3 kilometers from the target building. For 21 days, they did nothing but watch. They built a pattern of life analysis for every single resident of the 12 apartments at 27 Liebefeldstrasse. They knew who walked their dog at 6 a.m., who received grocery deliveries on Tuesdays, who had loud arguments with their spouse on Friday nights. And they knew everything about Frau Keller in 3B, the elderly widow whose life ran on a schedule so precise you could set your watch by it. She was assessed as a zero-risk factor. The plan in motion began on the night of February 19th. The weather was clear, the temperature just above freezing, a slight wind coming off the Aare River. Leah drove the operational vehicle, a dark green Fiat Tempra chosen for its ubiquity on Swiss roads, into position at 10:00 p.m. She parked in a spot they had observed to be vacant every night for 3 weeks. From her position, she had a clear line of sight to the building's entrance and the main road in both directions. Ronan and David took up positions at opposite ends of the street, disguised as pedestrians waiting for a tram, their encrypted communication earpieces hidden by winter hats. Ari was in the observation post, the third-floor apartment they had rented across the street, using a high-powered spotting scope with infrared capabilities to monitor El-Zain's apartment window. The light in his living room was on. He was home. At 11:36 p.m., Ari gave the green light. Yakov, you are go. Clock starts now. Yakov, dressed in dark gray work clothes and carrying a small, nondescript toolkit, exited the Fiat, crossed the street with the unhurried gait of a local resident, and slipped into the recessed side entrance of the target building. The lock on this door was a simple pin tumbler. He had practiced on an identical model until he could defeat it by feel in the dark. It took him 14 seconds. He was in. He navigated the short hallway to the basement door, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. He descended the concrete steps into the cold, damp darkness. He switched on a low-intensity red light headlamp, preserving his night vision. The basement was a maze of resident storage cages, lagged pipes, and discarded furniture. He located the PT-72 48 frame against the far wall, exactly where the schematics obtained from a bribed contact in the Swiss National Telecom Company had indicated it would be. He opened his toolkit. The first setback occurred almost immediately. A thin film of condensation covered the entire surface of the distribution frame. The cold, damp air of the basement meeting the slightly warmer metal had created a moisture problem Yakov hadn't anticipated in the dry run simulations in the desert. This was a critical issue. The induction clamps of the vampire tap required a perfectly dry, clean surface to function correctly. Any moisture could short the delicate sensors, or, worse, create a minuscule electrical bridge that would alter the line's impedance, a change that would be immediately detectable by the Central Exchange's automated diagnostic systems. He pulled a microfiber cloth and a small canister of compressed, deionized air from his kit. He began the painstaking, nerve-wracking process of cleaning and drying the specific terminal block for apartment 3C. This unforeseen complication cost him 90 seconds, a lifetime in an operation with zero margin for error. He informed Ari. The tension in Ari's reply was audible, a slight compression in his voice, even through the digital filter. Acknowledged. Proceed. Watch your clock. Yakov identified the correct wire pair, a red and a green wire among a sea of 50 identical pairs. Using a digital multimeter that measured line resistance with an accuracy of 4 decimal places, he was about to attach the first induction clamp when the second, far more serious complication arose. El Zine, in his apartment, received an incoming call. This was not the target call from Beirut. The pre-mission intelligence had provided the specific country code and exchange prefix for the Beirut call. This was a local burn number. Ari's voice was sharp in Yakov's ear. Hold. Target line is active. I repeat, hold your action. Yakov froze, his hand trembling slightly. If he attached the tap while the line was active, the slight change in impedance, however infinitesimally small, had a non-zero chance of creating audible interference on El Zine's end. A click, a faint crackle. It was a 1 in 1,000 risk, but Ari Ben David did not deal in acceptable risks. Yakov waited, motionless in the dark. The call dragged on. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. The 18-minute operational window was evaporating like mist. He could hear Ari talking to the other team members in clipped, coded phrases, keeping the chain of information flowing, maintaining situational awareness for the entire team. Finally, after 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the call ended. The line went dead. Ari's command was immediate. Go now. You have 5 minutes left. Move. Yakov worked with frantic, focused precision. He attached the first clamp. A green light on the device blinked once. Perfect connection. He attached the second clamp. He was about to connect the device's internal power source to activate its passive listening mode when he heard it. The slow, deliberate click of the wrong relay in the PT-28 frame. It was a diagnostic relay, part of an automated line testing system. It was only supposed to activate during a manual line test by a technician. But no technician was scheduled. It had to be an automated sweep. A new counter-surveillance system recently installed by Swisscom, something their intelligence had completely missed. An upgrade that wasn't on the schematics. The sweep would send a tiny electrical pulse down each line, measuring the return signal for any anomalies. The vampire tap, even in its passive, unpowered state, would alter the line's capacitance. It would be discovered. And that's when he heard the chair scrape across the floor in Frau Keller's apartment. The automated sweep, the wrong relay click, must have created a flicker, a split second of static on her bedside radio or television, just enough to rouse her, to make her think a fuse had blown in the basement. Her vigilance, born of a lifetime of military discipline and widowhood, was the final, fatal piece of the puzzle. The rest was a cascade of catastrophic failure. Her footsteps, her decision to investigate, the call to the police reporting a suspicious noise, the silent, professional arrival of the Bern Cantonal police car. Then, the climax. 11:47 p.m. Yakov hears the footsteps in the hall above. He whispers the alert to Ari. 11:48 p.m. Leah spots the police vehicle. Her voice on the comms is a blade of ice. Patrol car, blue and white, approaching southbound, no lights, responding, not patrolling. 11:48:30 p.m. Ari gives the abort command. All stations, abort. Rendezvous 2. Yakov, out now. 11:49 p.m. Yakov frantically attempts to gather the equipment. The basement door handle turns. He conceals himself behind the pipes. The door opens. Frau Keller's flashlight beam cuts the darkness. She doesn't see him at first. Her light pans methodically across the room, then settles on the open telecommunications frame with its exposed wiring. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, narrow. She knows this is not the work of a building superintendent. She backs out of the doorway, pulling the doors shut. And Yakov hears the terrifying sound of her fumbling with her keys, followed by the solid chunk of the deadbolt being thrown. She is locking him in. 11:50 p.m. On the comms, Yakov's voice is strained, a mixture of disbelief and dread. I am compromised. Door is locked from the outside. I am trapped in the basement. A stunned, 2-second silence on the network. In the entire history of the Mossad, an agent had never been locked in a basement by a 74-year-old woman. 11:51 p.m. Ari makes a decision that violates every operational protocol. He orders Ronan and David, the support team, to abandon their perimeter positions and prepare for a forced entry and extraction of Yakov. It's a desperate, high-risk gamble, a potential firefight with Swiss police on the streets of Bern. But leaving an agent behind with a piece of classified technology like the vampire tap is not an option. 11:52 p.m. It's too late. 2 uniformed officers are now at the building's main entrance, speaking with Frau Keller. Leah reports it from the car, her voice tight. Police on scene. 2 officers with the civilian. They are at the front door. They are being admitted to the building. 11:53 p.m. The officers descend the steps to the basement. They announce their presence in formal, polite German. They demand that whoever is inside come out immediately. Yakov is faced with an impossible choice. He could attempt to destroy the device, but its casing was a hardened ceramic polymer composite. It would take time and make a significant amount of noise. He could try to fight his way out, but he was a technician, not a Kaidan operator. He would be shot. He makes the only rational choice left to him. He places the vampire tap carefully on the concrete floor, raises his hands above his head, and steps out from behind the pipes into the blinding glare of 2 police flashlights. The arrest is quiet and professional. He says nothing. He offers no resistance. 11:55 p.m. Ari, watching the scene unfold through his scope, sees Yakov being led out of the building in handcuffs and placed in the back of the patrol car. He issues his final, grim command of the night. All stations. Mission is a catastrophic failure. Exfiltrate immediately. Execute Emergency Protocol Gamma. Protocol Gamma was the doomsday scenario. All team members were to independently make their way to the nearest border, destroying all communication equipment and compromising materials, using only their deepest cover identities and emergency funds. But they never got the chance. As Leah started the Fiat's engine to pull away from the curb, two unmarked police cars that had been waiting in darkened side streets screeched to a halt, boxing her in, front and back. A tactical team, clad in black, swarmed the vehicle. Leah, Ronan, and David were pulled from the car and forced to the ground before they could even reach for the weapons concealed within the car's chassis. Only Ari, watching in horror from the apartment window as his entire team was rolled up, remained free. With methodical calm, he packed a single briefcase containing a laptop with a thermite self-destruct charge, walked out of his building's rear entrance, blended into the shadows of a service alley, and vanished into the burned night. The immediate fallout was a diplomatic firestorm. The Swiss government, enraged by the flagrant violation of its sovereignty, made the arrests public within hours. The Israeli government, through its embassy, issued its standard pro forma denial of any involvement. But the evidence was overwhelming. The captured agents, using their cover identities, remained silent under interrogation. But Yakov had made one small, human mistake. In his wallet, tucked behind his forged Belgian driver's license, he carried a rental car receipt. The car had been rented using a credit card. The credit card was under his alias, but it was linked to a bank account that Mossad's finance department had negligently used for 3 other European operations. It was the digital thread that allowed Swiss investigators to unravel the entire lie. Presented with irrefutable evidence, the Israeli government was forced into a humiliating public admission. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to issue a formal televised apology to the Swiss president. The head of the Mossad, Danny Yatom, took full responsibility for the disaster and resigned his post. The captured agents were eventually released 6 months later in exchange for the apology, a hefty financial settlement, and a quiet agreement to share all intelligence on Hezbollah's European network. The mission was universally seen as one of the most embarrassing failures in the Mossad's storied history. A team of elite operators, armed with next-generation technology, undone by a vigilant pensioner and a faulty schematic. But the final revelation, the piece of the puzzle that emerged only years later from declassified documents and the memoirs of retired intelligence chiefs, recontextualized the entire event. The true target of Operation Helvetia was never just Abdallah El Zain's phone line. The vampire tap had a secondary, undocumented, and far more audacious function. If successfully installed and activated, its burst transmissions were designed not just to send data out, but to receive a signal back. A specific encrypted activation signal from Unit 8200 that would trigger a hidden subroutine in the tap's firmware. This subroutine would have instructed the device to send a series of precisely timed, low-energy electromagnetic pulses back into the Swisscom PTT-78 frame. These pulses were not random noise. They were a form of network sonar, designed to map the intricate web of fiber optic trunk lines, international communication relays, and data routing nodes that ran through the Bern Central Exchange. El Zain and his dirty bomb plot were the perfect justification, the casus belli, to gain physical access to that specific network node, which was a critical hub for diplomatic, financial, and intelligence data flowing between Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. The mission wasn't just about stopping one terrorist. It was a Trojan horse designed to gain a comprehensive map of the digital battlefield for the next decade of cyber warfare. The failure in Bern was a tactical humiliation, but it became a strategic catalyst. The sheer risk and catastrophic political outcome of a failed physical insertion forced a radical, top-to-bottom shift in Mossad doctrine. The agency, in a series of secret budget meetings, poured billions into its cyber capabilities, realizing that a digital key was infinitely more valuable and less risky than a physical one. The resources that would have gone into developing the Series 8 and Series 9 physical taps were instead diverted to Unit 8200, funding the very programs that would eventually lead to the